what kind of separates then like a good logo from a bad logo, right? Like getting into more of the
Yeah.
design aspects of it.
Well, it's almost easier to start with what's good. You want something that's easy to recognize, simple, and the way that I typically think of simple is, if I deleted this file, could I replicate this? And if you can, that passes my simple test. You want it to be unique. It should stand out with other businesses that are your competition, especially directly and locally. You're going to want to choose something unique from them, even if you're going for the same feel. And so you want to make sure that you're not being, no one's misinterpreting your logo as, oh, this is that other business. Another thing to keep in mind is, especially for small businesses, it should fit all of your required uses. So if you're one person with a van and you are like, the only place you're planning on printing it is on the side of that van, well, you should keep that in mind, and the style that you choose and the fonts that you choose, that, hey, this logo will be moving down the interstate. I want people to recognize it. And so just making sure it fits in all the required uses. If you're, a legal firm, maybe you want to go with something clean that fits in the fonts. So that way, when you're sending invoices or legal papers, you can actually have your branded logo on there. But if it's too complex or too much colors, it doesn't quite work, which leads me into my next point. It should look good with both the branded colors that you've chose, but then if you transfer it to black and white, it should also be visible and easy to see. And that's not just for like if you don't have a colored printer or something like that, but also if you're choosing like reds and greens, a certain percent of the population can't even see the difference between that. So there is some accessibility there too, where you want to use things that are, they contrast enough that you can see them, even when you take all the color out and it's just like, how dark is this? And so to go kind of to the second part of that question, a bad logo, it would be super generic looking. It wouldn't fit your brand. Could be complex. Maybe I've seen a couple that are like hand drawn that I would fit into that, where it's like, it looks cool, it looked good on a shirt, but maybe not, doesn't look like a great logo.
Not pleasing to look at, right? Like there are just
Right,
some things
exactly.
that just are not pleasing to look at and don't follow like simple
Mhm.
design or composition rules, right? Because there's a lot of rules when it comes to composition, not just in photography and videography, but also in
Mm.
logo design, right?
Yeah.
I like what you when you mentioned the accessibility part, because that's something that's really, I didn't really think of until you started mentioning it, was like the
Mhm.
accessibility part of being able for, the majority of the population to be able to see that. And there's a lot of
Mhm.
people out there who are colorblind. For
Yeah.
example, I know someone who their significant other can't see a certain shade of color, and so it's hard for them because they'll look at something like, it just looks gray to me, or it looks like this to me. So
Mhm.
keeping that in mind can really deter you. It's funny how we went from very like crazy contrasting bright all over the place color design from like the 90s and early 2000s to what it
Mhm.
is now.
Oh, for
But
sure,
that
yeah.
that make that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, and there's other places where that would help as well. If you have a storefront and this is going to be printed on a sign, if someone's driving by at night, especially if you're an agency that's maybe not open during the day, you might not have a light up sign. But if you have a clean and distinctive logo, even in the dark, it might show up better. And just like other environmental factors like that, you can't control exactly where everyone's going to see your logo, but you can control what the logo looks like and whether or not they're going to be able to recognize it in most cases.
That logo goes beyond just like looking cool, right? It kind of sets up everything else.
Mhm.
How kind of it's a really good place to start your brand, right? It's this is the vibe, and this is the art style. This is
Right.
what we want to get off of it, and that'll influence like your marketing, both on social media but advertisements, right?
Mhm. I think it's almost step one, unless, unless you want to like choose a color palette or something like that, that kind of incorporates into the logo design. Logo design really should be step one when you're doing this, because if you have a business, you should be either have a website or some sort of social media, most likely some way of outreaching to someone, unless you're completely word of mouth, in which case maybe you don't need it. If you're just getting calls from your neighbors because you're a handyman and you've got plenty of work, maybe you don't need to worry about it. But if you don't, what photo are you going to be using for your social media profile photos? Is it just going to be a photo of you? Because then it's going to be confusing and it's not going to look like a professional business. You're probably going to get less hits or leads that way through social media. And so it's just generally like professionalism. It should be almost your step one.
And that makes a lot of sense. You know, I mean, because when I love branding. That's my like fun little thing. It's and when I think about branding, I really think about making sure that I have that logo in place to guide everything, right? And that's typically, you know, when we've worked on business ventures together or worked with clients, we always talk about like, you know, having a really solid logo, and I think that's really important. So then, you know, that kind of answers the question already of, does your logo really matter? And yeah, I guess it does,
Yeah.
you know, because it really is going to influence the rest of your brand and your marketing, right? It's a
Right. And
piece of it, but it's an important piece.
yeah. And if you don't have a huge budget, if you spend your money on a logo and get a good logo, you could build out the rest of your marketing on something like Canva with little to no expertise.
Well, yeah, and I notice now that, you know, Canva is doing logos, and I mean even Wix, you know, that platform to build websites on, which I love Wix. I think it's a fantastic platform, especially Editor X. It's their new design tool for website designers and builders. And it's really they like build that in where you can get a logo through us. And that's great and all, but is there kind of some negative sides to that? Because you mentioned like, you know, you want something to stand out, right?
Yeah.
Like, you
Yeah.
don't want it to
So
just be what everyone else is doing,
mhm.
and I feel like, especially with Canva, no offense to Canva, because I love Canva and it's a fantastic program,
Mhm.
but I feel like a lot of the logos that I've seen from there are just very generic, and the chances of you using the same templated design and just dropping your names in there, it's gonna look like somebody else's.
Mhm. Yeah. I would say be very careful when you're choosing. If you're going to have someone else design your logo, be very careful in choosing who and where you do that. I'm not going to go through and grade all of the different places, but just for example, Fiverr has a lot of great designers. It also has a lot of horrible designers, like a lot of horrible designers. People who understand the basics, and they're essentially just they've basically built up a library of what I would consider clip art and are now selling it to people every time someone gives them $10. And that's not something that you want. You want someone who's going to be asking questions and figuring out exactly what's going to work best for your brand and actually understand what space do you fill in the marketplace, and trying to, you know, give you a logo, the end product that fills that spot.